Okay, welcome. Happy to be back live, continuing our series here. Yesterday, we took a look at the number one quality that will make a lover or make you irresistible to a lover. And today we're going to be taking a look at the radical truth about neediness. So before we pop into our topic for today, I wanted to address one of the questions that came up on the video yesterday because it leads right into what we're going to be talking about today. And the question was, I recently said to a boyfriend, hey, 3 days without even a text kind of makes me sad. And that appears to have been what caused him to derail. He's avoidant, and I guess my issue was being too dependent on him to make him feel comfortable and that the relationship was not in jeopardy. So I learned something about myself from that ordeal and started binge watching all your videos. I've learned a lot. However, I still feel to some degree that 3 days with no contact doesn't exactly feel right to me. So this steps into the basic misconception that most of us have when it comes to needs. And that is what we are going to be talking about today. So I'm really excited to have you here. And as we start to talk about these things and you pop in here, feel free to type your name and where you're coming from in the comments below. And I'll give you a little shout out here on the call. Maybe we can get a little bit of engagement here. So basically, if you have ever felt confused about your needs or thought that you were too needy or worried that you didn't have a right to your needs or you didn't know when to express them, how to express them, or if it's even safe to do so, then you are definitely going to want to stick around for this video because I am going to suggest something rather radical, and that is you can have needs and you can still love someone who is completely unable to meet them. And their inability to meet your needs does not negate your right to have them. It also doesn't negate your right to love that person, and it doesn't negate their right to love you either. It's just indicative of where you both may be in life's process, and that is not always the same place. It's not their duty to meet your needs per se, and it's not a judgment of them that they can't. It is also not possible to suppress your needs or lower your standards to accommodate. And we have this misconception that need satisfaction must be equated with love and commitment and everlasting, lifelong marriage and all of that. And that is not always the case. You can love a person without that person meeting any of your needs. Will that be the best person to spend a life with? Will that be the best person to be in a long-term committed relationship with? Is that going to make you happy? I think we can all agree, probably not. Okay. But not everyone you love has to be someone you build a life with. And there's no cap on how much you can love. And there's no rule that says the only way you can love is romantically or with your body or sexually. Okay. Now, for many of us, we think that love has to kind of be this gut-wrenching spiral into oblivion, or it has to rocket us to the stars. And we want it to kind of crack us open like a nut. We want it to be quick and fierce and instantaneously obvious because we are kind of addicted to this sense of urgency. We want this instant gratification and assurance. Here, now, I have found my person. Thank God. Now I can stop searching and I can finally start living. But the problem is that the living has to start long before that, and it has to continue throughout the relationship, and you have to be the one in charge of it. And so to call in a partner that is that much alive, that can meet you on that level, you got to be on fire about life yourself. You can't feel like just because you want someone to contact you on a regular basis and they don't, you don't have a right to have that need. No, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about yesterday. You stand sovereignly within yourself. If it's vulnerable for you to express, you know what, I'd like a text at least once a day to be in a committed relationship. And they freak out and they're like, woo, that's too much for me. Bounce off. Oh, I guess we're not a good fit. Bounce off. There you go. Bye-bye. Because the thing is, that's the universe sorting it out for you. Okay. And if you're hung up on that person and you're like, oh, a text a day doesn't match with that person, therefore I must be way out of bounds with the needing a text a day. No, that's not how it works. It means that you may not be a compatible fit when it comes to romantic attraction. Doesn't mean you have to stop loving that person. Doesn't mean you have to stop thinking that person's great. Doesn't mean that you can't enjoy your time with them. Just means they're probably not the person to be in a long-term relationship with you. That's all it means. That's it. That's all it means. Stop reading so much into things. Stop giving away your power that way. Okay. Love doesn't have to be that cracking you open like a nut. Okay. You cannot be a life support for someone else, and they cannot be the life support for you, because you are going to drain each other's oxygen. Love can be this kind of subtle warmth that seeps into your being, but that doesn't make it any less passionate. So cracking open that nut, it's kind of like yanking a seedling that has just begun to sprout growth, and you're only going to kill it with your fervent impatience. So it takes passion to, month after month and year after year, tend to a new growth. And if you water that seedling and you nourish the soil and you give it air to breathe and sunlight to feed it, that sprout can turn into a solid oak that is going to weather any season, and it's going to outlast the nuts that fall off its branches. So try not to be the person that wants to claw and crack that nut open. Be more like the sunlight and the soil and the water that encourages that blossom to open up in its own time. And if you can love in this way, prioritizing the process above some desperate need of something, and I would add that needing someone to contact you once a day if you're in a long-term relationship isn't a desperate need. There's a difference. When you suppress a need, it becomes a desperate need. Okay, when you allow your needs to come forth and you're honest about them and you voice them and you stand by them and you let come what may, they don't become desperate anymore, and they're typically not inappropriate or disproportionate anymore. It's allowing it to move through you. It's when you have an egoic attachment to a specific person who's not able to meet your needs and you're trying to fit them into the romantic long-term box and they don't belong there. That's when we get into the dramatic need suppression, and that's when they become bigger and bigger and bigger, and they turn into a hot box, they turn into a pressure cooker, and that is when they become this intense attachment hunger. Okay. So if you can be this sort of form of, if you can be sunlight, if you could be air, if you could be soil, if you can just allow something to evolve in its own time, you'll actually see that that is a more practical route to ultimate need satisfaction. Okay. And in a recognition of this process, you also become better able to discern the nature of your love, which is the only way to truly see and acknowledge who your partners really are and where they may be in their process without judgment. And so then you'll know what has to happen next for your own need satisfaction. So here, this would be an affirmation for this. I embrace my lover for who they are, and I embrace my needs. They do not have to be mutually exclusive. Okay, you don't have to choose. Right? Now, if you're confused about your needs, or if you don't know what your needs are, and you're like, well, I mean, at this point, I've suppressed my needs so much, I don't even know what they are. And now you feel like all your needs are disproportionate and you're consumed by attachment hunger because everything that you are sourcing your sense of self from comes from this idea that I have to get my needs met by my partner. That's going to cause problems. My kitty cat is threatening to jump in on the call. She's hovering over me in my window. This is sketchy. Actually, he's a boy. So he decided he wants to be a guest spot on this call, huh? So this is the thing. I want you to type there in the comment box, what are some of your needs? So just the top thing that comes to the top of your mind, what is a need that you have in relationships? Okay. And as an extension, you might think you might add, what are some of the needs that you have had that you have felt were too much, that qualified you as being too intense for a partner? Because this is the other side of it. If you feel like needing a text once a day to check in and say hi from a committed partner is not so bad, and then the person's like, whoa, that's too much, and they run away, then you also have to realize that that person has a hypersensitivity, right? So that person struggles with boundaries. That person struggles with needs because they are not able to say, oh, I see that you're having those feelings and you have a right to those feelings. And I'm also not necessarily responsible for that, but I am responsible for voicing what my needs are. And I'm responsible for acknowledging you and responding to that in a way that we can have an open and emotionally open and honest communication. So I'm hearing that you feel like you want to text at least once a day to feel secure in this. And I have to say that feels like a little too much for me. but I would be willing to text you like every other day, or maybe you can expect to receive a text from me every 3 days. And if that feels like a comfortable compromise for you, then, we can move forward with that expectation. And now you're not worried about not getting a text after 2 days because you know to only expect it every 3 days. And then if you decide that that is just not good enough, then hey, I guess that either you have to decide, is that something that you value, that you have a high priority value on? Is it like a 10 out of a 1 to 10? Is it a 4 or 5, a 3? Then you have to ask yourself, that's where our values and beliefs come in relationships, right? And then you decide how much of a deal breaker it is. And that doesn't mean the other person's malicious. It doesn't mean the other person is a dismissive, avoidant, and they don't deserve to be in relationships. They're unfit. They're broken. I see that so much on this feed. It drives me crazy. And it's like, no, it just means that their needs and desires don't match yours. And that's all it has to mean. Doesn't have to mean anything else about worthiness and deservedness. Okay. So part of it is that we cling so tightly to this idea that one person is going to make everything happen. And that's because we've lost touch with our essential self and our inner being. Okay. And it all comes down to these fears about worthiness. Okay. We've got some responses coming in here. The right words at the right time, emotional availability, respect, consistency, reliability, even over emotions, I guess. Okay. We have wanting communication every day, monogamy, and then there's laughter after that. Why is that so funny? I keep meeting people, falling in love with them, then finding out that they are poly and staying too long for months. Okay, so that's something. So let's dive into a couple of these. Okay, the right words at the right time. So what does that mean exactly? The right words at the right time. So on some level, you have to recognize that the right words at the right time is a bit of an omnipotent kind of fantasy, right? Because partner can't read your mind. And this is where communication, effective, deep structured communication comes in. This is when we have to get past the fear of people rejecting our needs. If they reject them, that's information. It doesn't negate your right to have them. So if you say, part of it is giving your partner a clue on what the right words are. And this is what comes into a relationship contract. Okay. So when I am feeling this way, then I would like to hear from you this. Kind of comes down to validation, mirroring, and empathy. So when you say blah, 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 I'm hearing blah, blah, blah. And that makes you feel blah, 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 right? I can understand that. And I can see how you might feel that way. So this is where it's a little awkward at first, but this is called an Imago Dialogue, right? Or I think of it as deep structure versus surface structure communications. It's where you're more in touch with how you feel first in communication, right? Now, and letting a partner know what the right words are, because sometimes we don't know what the right words are and we can't read your mind. And if you're not willing to share what would make me feel better in this circumstance, then how can you expect a partner to show up for you in that way? And we don't tell people what the right words are going to be, because if we tell them, then it doesn't count. It doesn't count if I have to tell them. Okay. And then you're just undercutting your partner's ability to show up for you. And that's because you're afraid of them showing up for you, because you're afraid that what you really need and want is not worthy. It's not good enough. Okay. So part of it would be communicating and letting your partner know what would be the right words in advance. That's part of the relationship contract, right? Because oftentimes we get mad at our partners and we don't tell them why, because we're afraid that if they knew why we were mad, then our needs would be unrealistic and inappropriate and blah, blah, blah. Okay. You just got to tell them. This is what we talked about yesterday. You just got to tell somebody how you're feeling, when you're feeling it, and what you would need in order for it to be rectified. Because then you give someone a chance to show up for you and have that honestly emotional conversation with you. That's not inappropriate neediness. That's just having a need and having a feeling and expressing it, because you're allowed to have those and you're allowed to express them. When you suppress them, you're like, I'm fine. And everything about you says that you're not fine. That's when the drama comes in, right? Okay. Emotional availability and respect. Well, those kind of go without saying, right? Those kind of go without saying. And that's something that just has to reveal itself over time. Of course, when you're just getting to meet someone, you're just getting to know someone, then you are establishing safety in the relationship and you are establishing a sense of rapport, right? And over time, you'll start to see how emotionally available and respectful someone is. And there's different ways of of practicing emotional availability. So, for example, starting with what is your feeling? So, starting to focus on feelings versus doing, feelings versus action. So, let's give like a very basic, unthreatening example. So, let's say someone approaches you in a coffee shop, and they're like, "Hi, my name is blah blah blah. I'd like to chat with you a little bit. What do you do for a living?" Rather than just immediately answering, you might say, "Well, I feel really inspired and fulfilled when I'm helping people. So I decided to become a therapist." Right? So rather than leading with what you do, leading with how you feel, leading with whatever your emotive life is like, right? So thinking about before responding immediately with a doing expression, or before you try to save a partner, right? If there's an awkward silence in the conversation, sometimes we like to jump in and try to fill the space and we try to save it. Don't do that. Stop trying to rescue people in conversation. Stop trying to rescue your partners. Partner doesn't call you. Stop trying to call them first. Just let them show up, right? Okay, what else? In terms of the monogamy situation, polyamory situation, I think that could very easily be avoided by just off the bat saying, if you've gone on a few dates and you feel you are feeling like, oh, this could be going somewhere, and I'm really interested in this person, then that's when you ask that question. How do you feel about long-term relationships? What is your stance on that? Are you someone who's sexually exclusive, or are you into non-monogamy and polyamory? I'm just wondering about that before I go putting all my eggs in one basket, right? So that's being willing to have that conversation. I have that conversation on the first date because that has happened to me. Okay, if someone spends a good amount of time with someone and does actions like they genuinely like you, but they put a hard no on commitment, isn't that a sign of being avoidant? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It's definitely a sign of someone knowing their boundaries and their limits and what they're willing and not willing to do, right? So how do you respond to that? That's more a sign of where you're at, right? Well, I know that I want a deepening commitment, and everything about this feels good to me, except that one thing that I don't like, which is that they're not ready for a commitment. So I'm just going to, but they haven't really gotten a load of me. But if I wait around long enough, then they'll come around, right? Now that's you starting to write a new narrative. That's you starting to step into the attachment fantasy. That's you sort of clinging to an egoic attachment. And you're assessing them as avoidant isn't going to change the narrative. It isn't going to be like, oh, well, they're just avoidant, so they really love me. And if I stick around, then they'll get over their avoidance, right? I know this secret thing about them. Thus, the truth of how they really feel will inevitably win out, and we'll be together and happily ever after. That's your egoic attachment. All right. And that's you trying to wield an outcome in your mind. If they're saying they're not ready for commitment, they're not ready for commitment. This is where you got to take somebody at their word. If they're expressing that now, then they're not who you're looking for, because that's not what you're looking for. And you got to listen to that. Stop trying to dig around for the thing that you're looking for. Take people at what their word, and what they're expressing to you in that moment is in contradiction to what it is it sounds like you're looking for. Listen and let the universe sort it out for you, because it's trying to, and you're fighting it. There are times when repetition compulsion is a factor, becoming involved with avoidance and emotionally unavailable people. Anytime that happens, you got to stop looking outward and start looking inward. You got to start looking inward. If you're consistently being attracted to avoidant individuals, it's a two-way street. You're not just like a beacon of light and all avoidants come to me and I have no role in this. You're also being attracted to individuals that struggle with avoidance. So what is avoidant in you? What are you avoiding? So when you are entertaining individuals that you identify as being avoidant of intimacy, if you are attracting them and they are attracted to you, what are you avoiding within yourself? Because when you're chasing down a partner that is unattainable, when you are preoccupied with chasing down a partner that is unattainable, you are safe and protected. You keep yourself safe and protected because you are preoccupying your time, energy, and effort with someone who isn't willing to look that closely. And so you are safe. So your needs, your vulnerabilities, they're not at risk of being criticized and told that they're too burdensome or too needy because no one's looking that closely. You're not at risk of being disappointed because you don't expect too much, right? And of course, the paradox is inevitably you start feeling that way anyway. And that is because these partners are called in because they're intending to show you that that is the part you have to go in and recognize and start dialoguing with and have that deeper conversation. What part of you are you avoiding? Okay. It's always a reframe. Letting people know I'm ready to, let's see, got cut off a little bit here. Letting people know I'm ready to end relationships. I avoid that forever and unconsciously manipulate them to do it for me. Oh yeah, that happens a lot. That happens a lot. You know, when we want to break up with someone and we're afraid of conflict and we're afraid of why? Well, I'm afraid that I'm going to make them feel bad. Do you think it's better to string somebody along and like let them think one thing and then have them be the one to end it because somehow it'll feel like it was their decision instead? They still want to be in it. They're just ending it because you're making it intolerable. That wasn't their decision. That's still your decision. It's just a matter of owning it for yourself, right? And that leads into boundary stuff. Everything inevitably comes down to boundaries. It's that enmeshed experience, like, oh, I can't hurt their feelings, blah, blah, blah. You got to be able to be the one to be like, this isn't right for me, and I'm going to end it. And maybe you're going to be upset about it. And that's your right to have that feeling. So you also can't like strip somebody else of their right to have their feelings, right? And if you're like, oh, I can't tolerate knowing that I hurt somebody else's feelings, you got to get over that. Because that's when we have to embrace our shadow. That's when we have to be like, you have to get over that good bad split that we've all had since childhood, you know, where you had parents who disowned aspects of you because you had to be an arm of their experience, right? That's enmeshment. That's when you start to feel somebody else's feelings in your body as if they are your own. And that's enmeshment. So definitely the work there is boundary stuff. Boundary stuff is to stop being afraid of your power and is to stop taking on responsibility for things that don't belong to you. And that's like someone else's experience and their feelings. And you gotta let them have their right. They have to have a right to have that experience, right? And by avoiding conflict and by, in this case, ending a relationship, but it happens in the context of relationships in general in a variety of circumstances and situations. You are stealing away somebody's right to their experience when you do that because you're worried about how it's going to make you feel. Okay. And this is not to say, you know, a lot of it is because it's not to say it's malicious. Oftentimes it's not malicious. It's not. And oftentimes it's really unconscious. And we think that we're easing somebody else's experience and path, and we're not. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Okay. It just becomes messier. So the sooner you start to let yourself have your feelings and to lean into them, you know, that trying to avoid their pain is really just trying to avoid our own pain. And the more you can let yourself understand that pain is not good or bad, it just is, it's just a feeling, and leaning into that feeling, you expand so much faster. You start to fill up your own circumference and your own sense of sovereignty in a much grander way. And you step into your power in a much grander way. And once you do that, then you start calling in partners who aren't going to make you think, oh, if I draw a line here, then they're going to fall apart, right? This is the other misconception around avoidance. You know, most people think avoidance, that people withdraw from and avoid intimacy because they just don't care. It's the exact opposite most of the time. Most of the time, even in dismissive avoidance, we've gotten that far because at some point they cared so much that they would become subsumed by it, that they become overwhelmed by it, that they lose themselves completely. Okay. And so then that leads to, in a circumstance where you have someone who says, hey, I'd like a text from you once a day. They experience that as being flooded. And it's because they care so much. And so then they're like, whoa, I have to be out of here for something. They are highly triggered and highly sensitive to something that isn't probably that big of a deal. But it's because they are so sensitive and they get flooded so easily because they have had that experience of wanting and needing and not getting it met one way or another, or being intruded upon so deeply that even just a little expression of need feels as if they are beholden to giving you all of them. Okay. And so they have to get out of there because they haven't developed enough boundaries and ego structure to handle that, to experience that kind of tension without experiencing it like a giant, enormous demand, because that has been their experience of intimacy and connection. That's not on you. That's them. That's them having to give you a right to have your feelings and be able to have their right to have their feelings and hold their own boundaries and be in that space with you without feeling like they're going to be blown over. So it's not that people who have avoidant attachment don't care. It's that they care tremendously. They're actually like the worst people pleasers in the world. And because of that, they run away because they know that they have this intolerable kind of fragility around their boundaries. Okay. And it's often because they've experienced tremendous kind of trauma. And so it's not that they don't care, and it's not that they don't love you. And it's just that oftentimes the way they have experienced love has been tremendously threatening. And I'm not saying this, that you should stick it out with someone who struggles with avoidance because because they just had a terrible childhood and that's why you should stay with them, blah, 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 blah. Like all these stories that we start creating in our minds. There's no right or wrong. There's no like, oh, you should do this at this point. You shouldn't do this at that point. I had another video recently that talked about how do you know when someone who is avoidant is in love with you and all of that. There's no one blanket answer to this. Everyone has their own unique experience and everybody needs to be addressed on the individual level. And, we are like thumbprints. All of us, we're like thumbprints. And you never know. But we do see trends in behavior, and that's how we can talk about things like anxiety and avoidance. But again, it's like a spectrum of ambivalence, and we're all going to be experiencing that on a different, level. And when you get together, it's like recipes. You have to figure out the right measurements. And the only way you can figure that out if you're honest about what ingredients are being brought to the table, right? Okay. Hi from Australia. Welcome. We have Lisa Gangliams. We have Isabel. We have Jade. We have Freedom. Welcome. We have Carrie, Carl, Ramon, and Emily. Hello, welcome. So one of the other things we talked about, consistency, reliability, even over emotions, I guess. Yes. So consistency and reliability, again, that's all about, that comes down to communication, but it also comes down to bids for contact. So John Gottman talks about, John Gottman has done like 40 years of research in his love lab in Seattle. And he has studied, I think it's like thousands of couples, and takes a look at what works in couples that are long-term and qualify their relationships as happy. And he also takes a look at what works in relationships that don't end so well. And one of the things that he talks about, consistency with emotions, not only has to do with the sort of empathic communication that we were talking about, where you basically mirror, so you repeat what someone has said to you in your own way. Then you validate it, which is to say that's a valid point, right? And then you empathize with it, which is to say I can see how and why you might feel that way, right? And then you express back, but owning your feelings, like keeping the focus on you. Now, when we talk about consistency and reliability, so number one, it's being able to communicate in that way and to voice your boundaries and to express your needs as you are having them. The second thing is also being able to respond to bids for contact. So there's lots of things that we do. We make bids for contact that are nonverbal, right? We might make a joke, or we might, reach out for someone, or we might like try to hold their hand, or if even in an argument, we'll make bids for contact just to make sure that I know we're arguing right now, but our basic security in this attachment relationship isn't being threatened by this argument, right? So there's certain ways in which we do that. So in Gottman's book, he wrote a book called The 7 Principles That Make Marriage Work. He's got an example where a couple's arguing over a car. They want to buy a new car. They don't agree on what kind of car they should get. And so the argument is escalating. And then at one point, the wife puts her hands on her hips like this, kind of cocks her head to the side, and the husband predicts what she's going to do because she's mimicking their daughter. And so before she can do it, the husband goes and like just sticks his tongue out at her in the middle of this like heated argument. And she starts laughing because he predicted what she would do. And then he starts laughing because they both are mirroring their daughter when she gets mad at them. And they're able to connect in that way. And the humor takes them out of the seriousness of the argument. And what that is it's a bid for contact. It's a bid for, okay, I know we're arguing right now, but we're still okay, right? And so there's various ways in which we reach out to partners that we try to establish things like that. So, and often, and if you have a partner who ignores those bids, then over time you stop expressing your needs. You stop voicing how you feel. You stop reaching out for contact because it's being dismissed. So another example might be an older couple. So this is all in that book. I highly recommend you read for anybody, even if you're not married, if you're single and you're looking for a relationship. Why not be proactive? Like, I definitely recommend reading that book. And if it's something you're interested in, I have a whole playlist in an interview series with Kyle Benson, who's a researcher at the Love Lab at the Gottman Institute in Seattle. And we talk at length about these things. So you can check that out. It's a playlist on my YouTube channel. But, another example is like, there's a wife who is looking out the window. The Love Lab happens to be on the river. And so she looks out at the water and she sees the boat and she's like, oh, honey, check it out. There's that beautiful sailboat out there. And the husband's reading the newspaper and he doesn't say anything, pushes his glasses up his nose and just completely ignores her. That's a bid for contact. Now, reaching out for and meeting that bid for contact might have been flips his newspaper down, pushes, oh, yeah, honey, that's great. Yeah, that's a beautiful sailboat. Reminds me of the time, that summer 3 years ago, right? So, but by ignoring her, he's dismissing the bid for contact, right? So there's a more heated example and then there's a less heated example. But little moments like that are moments of dismissal, and that is going to make you feel increasingly disconnected from a partner. So when we talk about emotional consistency and things like that, think about, number one, are our conversations emotionally honest? So am I touching the feeling place first? Am I aware of how I'm feeling before I'm accusing? This kind of goes to like complaints versus criticism. So Gottman also talks about there being a difference between complaining and criticizing. So for example, oh, why didn't you take out the garbage? Oh my God, you're so disrespectful and you don't care about me and you're so lazy. How many times do I have to tell you to do this? So that's a criticism. Expressing that as a complaint might be, oh my gosh, I feel so overwhelmed and so frustrated right now. I just got home from a long day of work and the garbage is still here. I guess I'm a little frustrated because I thought we had established a schedule for this and now I'm feeling overwhelmed by it. So I'm just wondering, maybe if you could take that out as soon as possible, then, that would definitely help me to feel more secure in this situation. And, if we can figure out a schedule and a way to handle this together so that it doesn't feel so burdensome for either one of us, I think things would probably go more smoothly for the both of us in this relationship, right? So it's keeping it on your feeling place. Like I am feeling really frustrated right now, and I really don't like feeling that way. So I'm wondering if together we could come up with some solutions here. And what you're doing is you're opening up an opportunity for your partner to show up for you and to offer solutions without feeling as if you are criticizing them. And you're also giving them an opportunity to feel connected to you because you're letting them know how you feel. And you're also you're also showing them how to repair. Like, these are also repair attempts. So you're showing them how to repair a lot of times. And, we have a tendency to express why we're mad. We might say we're mad about this or we're mad about that, but we don't tell our partners how they can repair it, because we don't want to tell them how they can repair it, because in that moment we feel like, you've hurt me. I'm not going to tell you how to repair it, because if you repair it, then I'm just going to be susceptible to being hurt again. Right? So I'm just going to punish you with how mad I am, and you can suffer for that. Right? And then we withdraw more and more and more. And then we start being disappointed about everything. And then we stop expecting anything from them. And then we close off. And then we wonder why they don't want to show up emotionally anymore. Okay. But again, on the other side of that is, you can express something vulnerably, and you can express something that is completely reasonable. And if you have a partner who's experienced that in the past, they are going to be hypersensitive to it, and they may bolt. And that's okay. That's okay. That's where they are in their process. Doesn't mean you can't love them. Doesn't mean you have to criticize them. Doesn't mean that they don't love you. Going back to what we started with in this call, it just means that that's where they are in their process. You got to let them have it. You can't bully them, manipulate them. You can't change yourself enough to inspire them to become something different that you think would make you happy, right? It's just where they are in their process, and you have to let that be. Let that be. And then notice where you are in relationship to it, and have complete faith and understanding that not a judgment of me. Doesn't mean I can't have needs. Doesn't mean there's no one in the world that could meet these needs. Doesn't mean there's no one in the world that could meet these needs and that I could be head over heels in love with. Just means that that's where they are in their process. That's where I am in my process. And I know that I'm probably going to need a little bit more in order for me to commit this much of myself to it. And that's okay. It's okay. The world is abundant. The world is full of possibility. And I'm fabulous. So obviously, this is just me expanding into my fullest circumference. This is just me living fully and being on fire about life. And if possibilities come into my realm and they create conflict or contrast, I've learned something new about myself. Thank you. Thank you, universe. And thanks for filtering away more of what I already know and don't need moving forward. Cool beans, right? Okay. How about the threat of losing custody? So this is where we have fear, right? So my ex, when I was going through a divorce, my ex at one point threatened to sue for custody. And I did not have a job at the time because I had stayed home to raise our child. And, in my ex's perspective, this was my divorce. So he wasn't going to help and he wasn't going to pay for it. And I had no money. I had no job. So it was kind of a trap situation. And he would sue for custody of our child. Oftentimes threats like that are just to try to exert control in the situation, because, if people are threatening things like that, it's often because they're positioning for control. The reality of the situation is most parents want help. Most parents don't want to be single parents. Most parents, once they get a taste of full custody, are like, whoa, I need support in this. Okay. And Carl, I happen to know a little bit about your situation. And I have a sense that in your situation, you would have a good argument in terms if it came down to being in a court of law, right? But that is a sticky situation. And sometimes you're going to have to kind of lean into that fear, and you still got to do what's right for you. And the children, we can't, it also comes down to the experience of we're worried about the experience of our child. That's the thing, is like, your children are going to have their own experiences in life. And it kind of goes back to like whatever you think spiritually. And I tend to be someone who approaches these things from a spiritual perspective. I believe that our children have chosen us as parents for the struggles that they would have in relationship to us. So I got divorced. People told me you should wait until he's older. You should wait until later. My son was 2 when we got divorced. And I thought, hell no, hell no. Because if I do it now, then it's just going to be all he's ever known. Right. And I was willing to fight for custody, and I knew I would get it because I had faith that that was good and right. And that was what was intended to be. And even if I lost it, then I was still going to show up in the ways that I could. And my son would come to me in the way that it was intended. But I knew that remaining in the relationship, and actually my ex and I are very, very close and good friends now, and getting divorced was the best thing that could have ever happened to us in our relationship contract. And we have shared custody. But, it didn't seem like it was going to be that way at the time. There were lots of threats and things like that. So it's some of it is being able to lean into the fear and take the action that you feel is required anyway, because that's what's in alignment with who you are, and the other piece of it is a lot of people say, well, what about the kids? But the thing is that everything you do is a model for your kids. So do you want your kids to grow up and be in the marriage that you are in? Or do you want your kids to grow up and say, you know what? It was really tough, and my parents made the decision to pursue their happiness. I remember when I was younger, my mom was also in a marriage that she wasn't particularly happy with. And I remember thinking to myself as a child, gosh, I wish she would have an affair. I wish she would have an affair, because I wanted to see that my mom was still living her life, even if she felt trapped in a situation, that she still found ways to be who she was, that she still found ways to have joy, even if it didn't fit the paradigm of successful relationship, right? And she did eventually leave that person, which I was very happy about. But it was a struggle for her, because she thought remaining in that marriage meant that she was being a good parent, or remaining in the marriage meant that it was going to be easier for her in child rearing. But you'd be surprised that once you confront that decision that you think is so terrible, you would be amazed at how much support actually ends up showing up for you once you make the space for it, right? That's a hard question. And it's not something to be taken lightly, but it is something that I think holds a lot of people back. Also, sometimes there's other options, like in relationship. Divorce is not always the only option. There's opening the relationship, right? We talked about non-monogamy and polyamory earlier in this conversation. That might be a circumstance that works for you. Maybe you just decide, look, the love relationship isn't working out here, but we could still be good partners and co-parents if we want to if we still want to pool our resources, if we still want to be, two figures in the same household for these kids. You don't necessarily have to share the details of your sex life with your children, but if you are getting your needs met in other ways and you've decided to revise the marital contract so that you can get those needs met, whether they are emotional or physical, and that allows you to show up more fully present as a functioning partner to the other adult in the household, and also as a parent to your children, because you are more emotionally fulfilled and satisfied. I mean, you can try that too. There's so many solutions and opportunities and options out there. Doesn't always have to be one way or the other. And anytime we feel like we're stuck in a black and white situation, that's when you have to realize that, oh, there's probably a multitude of possibility here that I am not examining, right? So I hope that gives you something to think about. Okay, a lot of questions here. I avoid conversations about career and work because I feel insecure about that area right now, but ultimately I'm avoiding my need to feel loved regardless of my current career situation. Right. So then you have to think about, what's your relationship to love? My avoidant wasn't originally avoidant. He revealed it in the relationship. How can you tell earlier? My avoidant wasn't originally avoidant. He revealed it in the relationship. How can you tell earlier? That's like a red flags conversation. Here's the thing. Usually when we meet someone and you're on fire about life and you see someone who is in essence a mirror of you, we feel on fire. We feel like, oh, this is passionate. We get infatuated. We're like, this is great. It lasts for about 3 months. And the thing that happens is, in that first 3 months, if you're someone who has a more avoidant disposition, you do feel filled up. You feel like, oh, I'm inspired by this. Remember, because sometimes when we have avoidance, we lean towards a frequency of having avoidant thoughts, behaviors, and inner monologue. We are looking for someone that inspires us so much that we finally feel filled up with that love feeling that we didn't have before. And we are looking for the one that's going to swoop in and make us soften our hearts, right? Oftentimes, individuals that struggle with avoidance when they have to be still with conflict, or they have to withstand uncomfortable feelings, the response is to avoid them. So there's not a lot of experience and vocabulary for being able to be still with ambiguity. Okay, and to not allow that ambiguity to fall into the, oh, this is bad, I have to run away from this category, right? That the ambiguity can actually be a bridge to a deepening sense of intimacy and camaraderie. But because the previous experience was that, that those ambiguous feelings were bad and had to be split off and led to negative outcomes. So they've learned that that's what happens. So they haven't learned anything else yet. So, typically for someone to move from a place of being more avoidant to a place of being more secure, they're going to have to experience intense anxiety that they had split off and disconnected them from themselves from at some point, because all of those experiences are like charges that get stored in the body. Anxiety and depression actually are qualified by their physical symptoms. So it's a charge that gets, I view the unconscious as literally your body. And if you want to learn more about that, you can look up like dance movement therapy. You can look up, a lot of trauma work is talking about this now. You can look up anything about kinesiology, Rolfing, things like that. But I view the unconscious as the body, and the body as a conduit for spirit. And that part of accessing those parts of yourself is being in touch with your body and titrating whatever wisdom you have down into the body. So in the way that I approach working with these things is using experiential methods that activate the body, that activate your creativity, that allow for an opening up of energetic flow, titrating the energy from our heads down into the body, just imagining like dropping your brain into your heart. That's how we take analysis into the body and start to feel differently. And there's lots of heart studies that have been done recently that show that brain cells exist in and around your heart and in and around your gut. So I feel like a lot of times we think of me as being in the head, but imagine taking that brain and dropping it down into your heart and into your gut. And then imagine that you are residing here. Imagine that the way you think of who you are is actually in here or in here. And even if you just like visualize that, you're going to feel a shift immediately. Okay. So oftentimes, there's no way to tell. There's no way to tell. I think that you just have to maintain your emotional boundaries. I mean, at least for the first couple of months. Like, this is what I mean by a slow and steady pace of opening up to love, like being like, oh, I'm in love. And like the first 3 months, I mean, in my perspective, that's a little fast. You don't know somebody. 3 months, you slower than we necessarily might want it to. Okay, I'm in my 20s and I'm having trouble figuring out when someone is very avoidant and not ready to be vulnerable enough for love, or just utilizing usual defenses that come down over time. Well, time will tell, right? Time will tell. And time will tell not only how they behave, but also how you respond. And you start to feel a deepening sense of intimacy or not. Or you start to feel like, okay, I feel like I'm kind of reaching a threshold with this and I'm ready for the next level. Are you ready? And they might say, no, not yet. And you might say, okay, well, I think I could wait another couple of months. I think I could wait another year. But if it doesn't if I don't see some shifts or deepening of intimacy happening by that time, you're still rolling forward. Your desire is still expanding. What you want is constantly being informed by the contrast you're experiencing and not receiving that. So you're just getting wider and wider and wider and wider and wider. This is why I say it's not possible to lower your expectations, because the more contrast you experience, the more you have a desire and you don't find it getting met, it gets bigger, 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 and you're just blowing up like a balloon. And it's going to be even harder to tuck yourself back into wherever it is you came out of. You can't. Your desire is ever expanding. That's how it works. And so you are going to experience increasing discomfort because your egoic attachment is going to remain this size. And the bigger and the bigger and the bigger and the bigger your desire gets, and that you get, your egoic attachment remains this size. So it's going to be like, oh, stop wanting so much. Oh, stop it. We can't have that. It's not okay to have needs like that. Oh, God, there they go again. And the harder you cling and you hold on to it, the bigger you're going to get. And the harder the conflict's going to get, and the worse it's going to feel, because you're not letting go of this idea. And you're not accepting that, oh, I am so much bigger than that. And why am I hanging on to this person that can't meet me here. Why? Because you haven't recognized and you're not willing to face the fact that you are this big. Because you think, oh, if I acknowledge that I really am all these amazing, great things, then I have to take responsibility for my life. And we don't like to do that because we think it's hard. But actually, that's the easiest, most easeful thing that you can do, because it's going to lead you in the direction of freedom of choices and of realizing that the universe is so full of opportunity and abundance for you, and that you don't have to rely on someone else to make you feel on fire about life. And we don't have to have this narrow view and perspective of love as being only this thing that can exist in A, a romantic context, and B, with this specific person. So narrow. So narrow. And that's because our experience of love has been narrow. And so I just recommend diving into things that make you feel good. Whenever you feel laughter bubbling up in your stomach, whenever you feel that kind of endorphin or adrenaline high from, doing something that you enjoy that's, let's say, physically active, or maybe creating a piece of artwork, or something that leaves you with a sense of peace and calmness and reflection, a moment outside of what they call the monkey mind or the spinning hamster wheel in your head, that is when you're able to tap into being on fire about life. Right. And the more you can access moments like those, the more you're able to accomplish this kind of moon's eye view of where you're at in your process and where your potential partners or existing partners may be at in their process. And understanding that we are all connected. Even if you have a painful relationship that ended and you feel like it ended bad, that person's still going to be connected to you. I believe in cutting cords, but I also believe that every cord you cut is going to grow back because we are all one. We are all connected. But the idea is that each time you make an intentional cut, you are expressing and sending out to the universe, this is the way in which I want that connection to exist.